Let's now go to Nick Champion, Labor MP, in our Adelaide studio. Nick Champion, thanks for your time. You've resigned as Secretary of the caucus so that you can openly now declare where you stand on this whole issue. You're backing Kevin Rudd. When did you make this decision?
Well, yesterday, David, I thought it was the best thing to do to talk to my colleagues and to both Julia and Kevin before I made a decision. And having done that, I weighed up, I think, the merits of the case and made a decision to go with Kevin Rudd, mainly because I think he has the best ability to reassure Australians during what is a pretty tumultuous time in the world economy. And I think people trust Kevin Rudd. I think they want to support him. I think they want to give him a go. And I think he's best placed to steer Australia, as he did through the global financial crisis, through this time. We do have, I think, a bit of crisis in confidence in the Parliament. I think that's reflected in the very high dissatisfaction ratings of people like Tony Abbott. I think Kevin Rudd is someone that people genuinely like and genuinely want to see in the top job. And I think he'll do a good job for Australia and a good job for this Parliament.
Are you saying that it was anything in the last couple of weeks, and in particular the sort of attacks on Kevin Rudd that we saw in the last few days that influenced your decision here, or is this a view that you've held for some time?
Well, I think the view to back Kevin Rudd has formed over some time but crystallised yesterday. I think my decision to resign as caucus secretary is solely about some of the tactics that have been used in the last week, where people who should know better have, and who normally are very disciplined and timid even in some cases, have now oscillated to complete recklessness in their public discourse. And I think it is incumbent on every member of the Australian Labor Party just to be a little careful about their public discourse, about what they say on television cameras, to not offer personal attacks or character assessments. I think it's really important for the legitimacy of this ballot that people talk to their colleagues first before they go on television, and they should be careful about what they say on television, because whoever's leader has to bind the show together at the end of the day. And if we moderate our public discourse, that process will be much easier, and the outcome of the ballot will be have much more public consent. I mean, I think we do have to be aware of the need for public consent in all of this.
What's the, Nick Champion, it's Kieran Gilbert here. What's been the reaction within the party to you doing this? You're breaking away from the right faction in South Australia. Have there been any threats to you about pre-selection and so on? Have there been any moves to try and press you not to do what you're doing today?
Well, look, obviously I've discussed things with people, and they've all been civil and honourable discussions, and I've not been threatened, and I wouldn't ever expect to be threatened. South Australia, the South Australian right's a bit like an Irish Catholic family. If we have blues, then the blood's wiped up pretty quickly afterwards, and we treat each other civilly. And I think that's an approach that should be taken throughout the party. I think, the public understand and even have an opinion of the need to have a ballot. But I think people want us to conduct ourselves appropriately, and that's certainly the approach that everybody in South Australia has taken. I think that's the model that should happen across the country. We need a clean ballot, we need a legitimate ballot, and we need a ballot that's free of block voting, where we need people to make up their own mind based on their own conscience. That's the most powerful thing that any member of Parliament or any member of the party can do.
Nick Champion, I've read a few things this morning about some other comments that you've made about feedback in your electorate. A note was left on your car at some point, and what's the other sort of messages you've been receiving?
Well, no, I got to the office. I mean, it's always natural to sort of question yourself and be a bit nervous about making these judgments. But I got to work this morning, and on my window there was this note, and it's a bit of a crude note. It's written on a BP receipt, a receipt from a service station. It was stuck to my office door with chewing gum. So it's a pretty crude note. But what it says is, put Kevin Rudd back as PM. People voted for him. A pretty crude but effective message from one of my constituents, an anonymous a constituent, but someone who wanted me to know that he or she supported Kevin Rudd. And that's what I pick up generally in the electorate. I think there's an attitude out there that Kevin Rudd wasn't given an appropriate opportunity as Prime Minister to face the nation. I think people regard it as their prerogative to provide performance assessments of politicians, and I don't think that they think it's the party's job unless there is the most, unless there's the most sort of desperate circumstances, and I don't think we reached that in 2010. I think we rushed to judgment, and I think we've paid for it ever since. I see the restoration of Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister will be the greatest comeback story in politics for a long time. I think the Parliament will accept the decision of the party. I think they'll get, on back to work. I heard Tony Windsor talking about how he wanted to be at work, doing things, talking about public policy, and we certainly do too. But we must simply clear this leadership question up. And in my mind, and what really swayed me in the end is, I think the party has to face this choice. Whether we choose a leader for ourselves and for our own prerogatives and for our own desires and for our own wants and needs and likes and dislikes, or whether we choose a leader for the country. And if we're choosing a leader for the country, then we'll choose Kevin Rudd, because only he can reform Labor's governing coalition, a voting coalition in the community, and only he can reassure the Australian people at this torrid and tumultuous time in the world economy.
But Nick Champion, what do you say to your cabinet colleagues who work closely with Kevin Rudd, sat around the cabinet table with him and say the guy is impossible to work with? The paralysis in government that senior ministers are openly now talking about, isn't there an argument that you wouldn't know that because you're not in cabinet, but these people who sat around the table with him can speak with authority on the dysfunction in the Rudd government?
Well, David, cabinet government is a collective responsibility. And if there are problems in a cabinet, then it's incumbent on a cabinet minister to raise them in cabinet, or to raise them in caucus, or to raise it in the Parliament, to resign. If there were such big problems in the government, why didn't anybody do that? And the reason they didn't do that is because there weren't that many great problems in the cabinet. It steered us successfully through the GFC.
So it's a bit rich. It's a bit rich for these cabinet ministers to complain now.
Well, I just find it a little incongruous. Either they're acknowledging a personal failure on their own part to stand up, right, and to confront a Prime Minister if the Prime Minister was so bad at the time, or they're trying to, scapegoat someone. And I just think, for my own mind, people have got to take responsibility for their own actions. And I find some of the sort of public discourse about not having phone calls returned or not getting a meeting. I mean, if that happened, I was talking to a Keating government minister about this, and he said that, there was a time when Keating wouldn't give him a meeting, so he rang him at the lodge one day. And of course, he got a meeting. So, if you're a cabinet minister worth your salt, then you can get a meeting, you can get a phone call returned because you're persistent, and because you get the job done. So, I do find that criticism a little contrived, to be honest.
Well, let me ask you this. All the signs are that Julia Gillard will win on Monday, that Kevin Rudd doesn't have the numbers to see her off this time around. Where's that going to leave you in relation to Julia Gillard? I mean, you've made it clear here that you don't think she can win, that Labor can win with her as leader. Do you really just get on with it after Monday, stop arguing in favour of Kevin Rudd and flip back to supporting Julia Gillard?
Well, I think the most important thing about the ballot on Monday is that it is clean. It's a clean ballot, that it's free of block voting, that people make up their minds on the merits of the argument. I think if we have a ballot like that, then everybody will accept it, and most importantly, the public will accept it. I mean, a big problem about 2010 is that a large number of the public, and frankly a section of the caucus, had a great difficulty with what occurred and the fact that there was no ballot at the time and there wasn't much time to think. We all found that, I think, a little uncomfortable at the time. So I think we need a clean ballot, one free of block voting, and one that assesses the merits of both leadership candidates, according to all the performance indicators that politicians give themselves. In regards to Julia Gillard, look, I spoke to Julia yesterday, and she was very, very honourable and decent in her discussions with me. She is an excellent legislator and a very, very good human being, and she's as tough as nails. She has a lot of very admirable qualities, but I just don't think she has the same ability to reassure the country or to bring Labor's voting coalition together. And I think that's really the task of the Labor Party over the next 18 months.
Nick Champion, that your message to the cabinet colleagues and so on that have been having a go at Kevin Rudd, it's not the first time you did that either. I mean, you did that in the caucus after the election and had a go at them at that point as well for not standing up to Kevin Rudd. If you had one final message to MPs who are wavering within your party, what is it this morning? I mean, you've made your point about Kevin Rudd and so on, but if they're undecided, they don't want to take the risk of another change, what would you say to them?
Well, what I say to them is that there is no risk in change. I think the Parliament will accept our decision. I think it will lead to some excitement in the short term, but I think we'll have stable government in the long term, a much more stable government, I think. And I think we'll have much better prospects at the next election. And the question the caucus has to ask itself is, are we choosing a leader for ourselves or are we choosing a leader for the country? And if we're choosing a leader for the country, then we'll put our own likes and dislikes and self-interests aside and elect Kevin Rudd and back him, and we'll win the next election.
All right, Nick Champion, Labor MP from South Australia, thank you so much for joining us today.